in those countries, including Pakistan. We're working on the documentation and making it as easy as possible for those who are eligible.
Well, Taliban fighters have taken over Kabul airport after the last US flight departed last night. It had been the base for the international evacuation effort since the fall of the capital. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson says he has full confidence in Dominic Raab, despite pressure on the Foreign Secretary to resign. It comes as the PM leaves Downing Street on a 4-day trip to the west of England. His spokesperson insisted he will be continuing to work. Geronimo the alpaca has been put down by government vets. The animal faced a destruction warrant after twice testing positive for bovine tuberculosis and losing a high court battle. More than 100,000 people signed a petition to save him. And drone footage of the site of Reading Festival shows the vast amounts of rubbish left behind by music fans. Around 100,000 people attended the festival over the bank holiday weekend. And that's your news on Talk Radio TV.
This is Talk Radio,
keeping you up to date across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app.
Rob Rinder on Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm with you on drive time until 7 o'clock, and I'm sitting here looking out at Tower Bridge, and it seems that Extinction Rebellion have vegan marched themselves off of that bridge and onto London Bridge. I had to elbow my way here, and I did it all for you, listeners. You see, I really deserve my own parade. I'm so courageous. And on the topic of courage, you'll have seen that yesterday, the last US military fight left Kabul airport, marking the end of a 2-decade presence in Afghanistan. And we forget about this, but to really, I think, focus on it, it was America's longest war. Officials said the last C-17 aircraft took off with the US ambassador on board after midnight local time today, but they added that the diplomatic mission to assist those unable to leave before the deadline would continue. How they're going to do that, I don't know. I hope they live up to their word. Frankly, it's seems to me, pointless, but as useful, helpful, and as kind as a pork chop in a bar mitzvah. But there you are. Here to give us the latest on everything stateside, is a man who's informed, fair, and balanced. He comes live from Washington, and he's a White House correspondent for Real Political News. We know him as Prof. JC, but it's Professor John Christopher Boer. Prof. JC, first of all, thank you for being on and for informing us what's happening over the pond. You know, it really matters to us to hear what you have to say. I think it's unusual. You're one of the few commentators, and I listen to Fox and I turn over to listen to MSNBC. That really feels like you try to consider both sides of the argument. So we're grateful for that here. Prof. JC, you are a proud American, always have been, and unashamedly so, as you should be. I looked at the image of that last flight. I asked for it to have been pulled up, which it will be right now, and I hope you can see it. It's a haunting scene with, as you can see, night vision goggles. You know, sometimes an image speaks 1,000 words. This is the last soldier after 20 years, after trillions of dollars, where the government have left in excess of $85 billion worth of equipment to a fascist army to take control of that country. I just wonder, looking at that image of that lone soldier leaving that airfield, what that image means for America, and frankly, for want of a better way of putting it, Prof. JC, as a man who loves his country, what it does to you.
Well, he was a very high-level commander, mm-hmm. and he, as the captain of the Titanic and all ships, pledges to be the last one to leave.
Yes,
and he's left a sinking ship, in a sense. Allegorically, the Afghanistan, and America has pulled out Some say they withdrew. Some say they surrendered. Some say they successfully left. You will hear what the commander-in-chief has to say at 7:45 UK time. He'll be going live from the White House, and he'll be putting his point to the edge of this quill after the CENTCOM commander said it, gave his point of view. When we left, an hour after, he said, we are out of there. And then you had the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, give his point of view, some would say spin, saying basically, we are, here's the one I love, we're transitioning the mission. Now, someone actually paid someone to come up with that term. Now, I worked as a communications director in 3 federal agencies.
You did. Yeah.
I made up a lot of terms, but that really is the better one. Transitioning the mission. And what it means is, and you hit on it very well with your lead-in, that he believes that we can now use, instead of military, we can use diplomatic efforts, and we will be responsible for the individuals left there, and through some kind of leverage, we will get those folks out. We have citizens in there. We have people who were loyal to us, and remember Colin Powell's famous line. He referred to Pottery Barn, I guess you could call it, John Lewis in London. If you break it, you own it, baby. And that's what's happening here. And Americans are concerned. Of course, we've got a raging hurricane. Yeah. We've got COVID, which has gone beyond anyone's expectation. And Joe Biden has to be dealing with all 3 of those crises simultaneously.
Prof. JC, you're right. I mean, it's a lot of plates to spin. And looking at President Biden's performance, most especially at the press conference he gave responding to what seemed to us in any event, you'll have seen British Parliament to be fairly softball questions. Does it give you the confidence of him as a commander-in-chief?
Well, I'm not to judge his abilities of commander-in-chief. I do know that he pledged during his campaign that he would not continue this 20 years war, that there would not be a 5th president who was responsible for the lives that were lost. But I think that when you look at the whole picture and the world, and put it in a global perspective, which I know you do constantly, and you think, who are the winners and the losers? You know, Rob, we haven't won a war since we fought with our British allies. And VE Day and VJ Day was the last time we really totally won a war. And it's been going on for a long time. It's almost as if you listen to Eisenhower's speech about the military-industrial complex, it's as if we're putting these wars, these skirmishes, the battles against the Soviets through JFK and Khrushchev, all the way up till now. We're creating a market to sell more stuff. And now when I look at the footage, the B-roll, I see all that stuff is being worn by the Taliban, right. And even more frightening, by ISIS-K, who is the most insidious group, and they make the Taliban look like Mother Superior.
But Prof. JC, just to be clear, some of our listeners won't necessarily know what you're referring to. It was a speech that President Eisenhower gave about it was him expressing his concern about the growth of the military-industrial complex, that once you have war and once you have a vested interest in fighting wars and big corporations that have that financial interest, you can create a monster. My emphasis, not yours. And the wars you're referring to, I mean, Korea, which ended, it was still war there in terms of international law, Vietnam. The analogy doesn't hold necessarily true. You think of Reagan and Thatcher, and certainly you guys, with all of the might of the industrial military complex, outspending the USSR was a fundamental reason why you guys, alongside the UK and NATO, won the Cold War. So I wonder how good your point is in that regard. Well,
in a sense, it was Ronald Reagan who scared I don't know if I can use this
We can
word
say bejesus.
Yeah, I did say it. I didn't say it, but you said it. Out of the Soviets, and they thought he was basically a madman, and that he would dropped the big one, which he actually said off mic as a joke.
I know.
And people remember that. But I think Ike, remember, who I know his granddaughter. I'm very fond of her, Susan. She's a brilliant educator. Mm-hmm. He was the one who led the fight across the English Channel. And then he said, wait a second, let's not get caught up in just building war and building just for the sake of building a military industrial complex. And I think these are wise words to heed, especially now.
Prof. JC, in the aftermath of what happened in Benghazi, you'll recall, and for our listeners that don't remember, where the American embassy was overrun by terrorists and your ambassador murdered, there were congressional hearings, and they were an uncomfortable watch, where those in the executive branch of your government are held to very often angry account by senators and congressmen and women. As you look at what's been left in that country, close to, it seems, this is just a rough estimate, but around $87 billion of equipment in the hands of fascists and terrorists. I mean, what can you see in terms of the political implications? Who's going to sit in those chairs in those congressional hearings and answer for what happened? I started my show yesterday to saying we live in a generation where nobody sits down, looks up, has shoulders broad enough, or a nobility great enough to say sorry. Do you think that's going to be the case here?
Well, I think first of all, in a few hours' time, the president has to make recompense. Besides saying how sorry he is about the death because he had a son who died from getting cancer from a similar war, the fact is that he needs to say, perhaps, maybe I wasn't right in the way I withdrew from this. Maybe I should put the bigger global perspective on the table first and get my allies, who may never trust us again, to go full bore behind us, and they're not. We saw that.
In terms of,
I think,
sorry to interrupt you, Prof. JC. In terms of diplomatic relations, we all saw, and now we know that the head of the CIA met with the head of the Taliban. We know that prior to this administration, the Trump administration was prepared to sit down with difficult people. That's a euphemism for the fascist Taliban government. We know that sometimes it's more jaw and less war, as a great statesman said, and you have to talk to people even that you can't stand. It's difficult, though, isn't it, to square that given the ongoing and enduring mission of the last 2 decades in Afghanistan. As I sit here today, I was watching and looking at a story of a comedian who was tortured and murdered by the Taliban, of one of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters taken out, raped and tortured by the Taliban. As we think of that, do you think it's ever reasonable to sit down and talk to terrorists, or do you take the more hardline Thatcher view that terrorists have to be beaten?
Well, you know what Churchill said: the Hun is either under your boot or at your throat, and he laid down that gauntlet, and we see where that went. However, I will answer it this way. Kennedy was fond of saying, and I met him, I worked on his brother's campaign as a young boy, and Kennedy said, never negotiate out of fear, but never fear to negotiate. And perhaps we can, but we also have to look and see who we are negotiating with. Mm-hmm. The Taliban are not running a country. Now, I was in the Clinton administration, like I said earlier, and there's a federal bureaucracy. You have that in the UK. I'm looking at St. Paul's Cathedral behind you, and I see Parliament is the other way, and you guys know how to run a government. These individuals don't know how to run a government. They don't even know how to run an airport. Let's see what happens when they're given over to no longer it's America's fault, it's your fault, and they're going to be having fights with the ISIS-K in the meantime. They have to become bureaucrats. They have to become leaders. They have to become, Biden said that the mission was not about nation building, but in a sense, the fact is that we did build quite a nation there with our allies. We had schools, we had young ladies going to school and becoming professional people. That's done. That's over.
Right.
We had individuals who had an elected, I believe Karzai and Ghani were actually elected. There will no longer be elections. This is something that not even the UN, who's asked to come in there, and the Security Council voted against what's going on there. And I understand your British Foreign Secretary Raab said we have to face the reality of Afghanistan, and that we don't know what the reality is, Rob.
Prof. JC, just the last question before you go. We don't really get a sense, unless you're a political junkie like me, of how this is playing out in the American public. As you rightly described, you have a very serious, catastrophic weather event, a hurricane happening in the Gulf. That's sort of wiped out electricity for days. Of course, it's impacted the poorest. There's been a big spike in coronavirus cases, and coronavirus has never been more politicized, against a backdrop of your nation never being more politicized. So to what extent does this really feature or matter on talk radio stations, and, if you like, across what I'm going to describe as your average American? How much do they care about this?
Well, I think, maybe Joe Biden's hoping that this will be just a one news cycle story. It depends on the visuals. It depends on who is tortured, who is beheaded, who is thrown out of helicopters and hung, what it looks like when the young girls are taken by the Taliban, and God knows and God pray nothing awful. That will be playing. They will be watching that. But in the meantime, the American people are concerned about COVID. They're concerned about, we call kitchen table issues. And, America is divided. We've been divided since Trump. We have taken very strong views and positions. The American that I grew up with, I don't recognize anymore. And I think this is something that will hurt us internationally, but domestically, I don't know. We have an election in a year, and the midterms, which and all of the House and 1/3 of the Senate is up. And we'll see we'll see if this has legs, as we say, if this will continue to be an issue. And if it is, it will not be a good one for Joe Biden. Although, let's give him credit. He's got almost 200,000 people out of there in those airlifts, which is quite a feat for the gentleman.
I hear you, Prof. JC. I feel less generously disposed. I recently watched a great opening on Bill Maher's show. I'm not sure if you saw it. It was 7 minutes of a monologue, and I hope you get a chance to watch it. I've really been reflecting on it. And one of the things that he said and spoke about with such passion, profundity, and I think, above all else, a sense of yearning for what America was, what you were touching on before, was that America, despite all of its problems, has turned inwards to criticize itself rather than focusing on its greatness and its capacity for good. And that's something that I want us all to reflect on. I know that you're a patriot American. It's something that you espouse. Professor JC, thank you for all of your sage wisdom from that side of the pond. I look forward to having you back on. Now, I want to hear your reaction to all you've heard today. Perhaps it's about Afghanistan. Are you somebody that's worried about leaving the house because of COVID? Is it time for us to, I'm going to put this in the kindest way possible, grow up, stop worrying about all of the fear-mongering, and live our lives in some species of freedom, of joy, of the possible? That's certainly the way that I feel today. Maybe you don't. Whatever your point of view, get in touch with me. It's 0344 499 1000, or text TALK in your message to 87222. Or if you want to engage the debate with a bit of shouty and you get my Twitter handle right, you can tweet me at Talk Radio. But between now and then, it's time for the news.
Online, on DAB, and on the Talk Radio app. Talk